Good morning. Welcome back to Late Start Show. We are here today with Mr. Dan Swander, University School Class of 1961 graduate, veteran consumer products business leader, and co-founder of Swander Pace and Company. How are you doing today, Mr. Swander?
Right side of the grass. Can't complain.
Well, Mr. Swander, thanks for joining us. I know you're all the way on the West Coast, so thanks for working with the time difference here. We just want to start at the beginning. Could you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, your family, and some of the early interests or hobbies that kind of shaped your childhood?
Sure. I actually grew up literally on the backside of the playing fields at the Shaker Heights campus. We lived on Belmore Boulevard. I walked through our backyard, a neighbor's backyard, and across the fields to go to school. And I went to U.S. for 13 years, kindergarten through senior year. And I would tell you that the family and my grandparents were around the corner. U.S. was at least the heart of all of my activity. My parents played golf, and my grandfather was a fisherman and hunter. And I had an older sister and a younger sister that both went to Hathaway Brown. So we were dyed-in-the-wool Shaker Heights kids. And just really enjoyed it. I mean, it was no doors were locked. You played outdoors until your dad whistled it was time to come home for dinner, and that was life. It was great.
Now, obviously, living so close to US kind of gives you that natural reason to kind of go to the school. But do you kind of remember some of the early days at US? Obviously, you started in kindergarten, same here. And I kind of remember some of my kindergarten memories, kind of early on. But do you remember kind of any of the lower school or maybe some just first impressions of the school?
Charlie, to be honest, I remember all of it. I could name every teacher from Mrs. Schreiber in the first grade to the senior teachers. It literally was, I mean, I think I went to a pre-kindergarten at HB and that was the first time I was in class with a girl, and the next time was in graduate business school. And it just, I mean, U.S. was such a part of my, education and growing up and just personal life, that it's absolutely memorable. We put out a 50th reunion book for the class of 61, and they had pictures. And I could go in, we had fifth and sixth grade football. I could name everybody in that picture without a list of names. Took a while on a couple of them, is that Fritz or Fred, but other than that, I mean, I absolutely, ate, drank, and slept university school.
That's awesome. And we talk a lot about, with our guests, the people that really made that experience special. Do you remember a couple of those favorite teachers or mentors who left a lasting impression on you?
Yeah, that's one I did look at, Jack, and there were two. First and foremost was Don Moulton. Don and I both started in 1948. He was a brand new coach, and I was a brand new kindergartner. And over the course of 13 years, he was probably the most significant mentor in my life outside of family. And, played soccer for him. I think I was allowed to start playing soccer in the 7th grade. I had to play football up through the 6th grade. And then, we had first undefeated soccer team at US in 1960. And he was just a close personal friend, but for life. The other one would be John Knapp, who was a math professor. He was also the basketball coach, but he was the teacher who in 11th grade kind of knocked me upside of the head and said, "Start to get serious about academics, young man. You're wasting a lot of time here with girls and sports. Not that you need to cut them out, but you just need to balance better." So those would be the two. But I would tell you, I can't remember a teacher I didn't like or think highly of. Even the foreign language teachers who yelled at you and why am I so slow? But no, they were all great. But those two stood out among the best.
look at the campus then versus what you saw when you've returned a couple of times. I mean, one of the
Mhm.
times that was obviously like one of the times that we found also online was when you returned in 2021, which is definitely during kind of the end part of COVID. So it was a little bit different. But you've seen the kind of the upper school campus, the Shaker campus in so many different lights. How have you kind of seen it grow and how have you kind of see US as a whole grow since you've been here?
Well, a couple of dimensions. First of all, I mean, I think two campuses always creates opportunity and challenge. Um, and I think, clearly my perspective was as a kindergartner, I was walking around trying not to get run over by seniors. That doesn't happen anymore. Um, but, in the sixth or seventh grade, I knew seniors and went and watched their sports. So I suspect that's changed a bit. There's a core group that, gets up through the eighth grade at the Shaker campus, and then the school kind of doubles in size. So you have a brand new uh, half a class. That's great. Um, Second, I think, clearly it is much more of a greater Cleveland school than it was. No question, it was kind of Shaker Heights, Cleveland Heights, and then further east out into Chagrin. Um, the one thing I have poked at a couple of times when I've been back is the impact of the absence of a dorm. We had a dormitory on the Shaker campus, and some of our best friends were those, kids who were there from Sunday night to Friday afternoon. And if they didn't go home, they came and stayed with either our family or other families. So that's a lost dimension, not bad, just different. And I think clearly the demographics, the diversity of the campus and the students and the teachers um, is terrific. So I don't see anything, that is a distraction or a detraction from the quality, but it's two campuses, and I know they do a lot of kind of cross roughing to just try and connect them. But even in the tail end of Don Moulton's life, when I'd go back and see him, I think he kind of missed the one campus, K through 12.
Well,
So yeah,
I
that's
think
what
you'll
I.
be happy to know we had the first home football game at the Shaker campus under the lights on a Friday night, and that was a really cool community moment to see everyone come down there, and we ended up getting the win. So that was an awesome moment to connect the
That
team.
was a great idea. I wish I had been able to, sneak a flight back and see it, but I didn't. It was a great
Well,
move.
yeah, well, one thing that's stayed the same about US is its commitment to learning outside of the classroom, whether that's through sports or other extracurriculars. Did you have any sports or clubs from your US days that really influenced you then and perhaps later in your career?
Oh, I don't think there's any question about soccer. I mean, and I remember my I think I got glasses in like the third grade, and my parents were thrilled because they didn't think I'd be able or want to play football. Then they went to the first soccer game. Went to a varsity soccer game, and some kid broke his leg, and they were terrified that I was going to go play soccer. Well, I loved it. I mean, went on to Trinity, and we got into not the first, but one of the early national tournaments for NCAA soccer. Um, and again, the teammates that I developed relationships with, both at US and at Trinity, some have been lifetime friends. I mean, again, I think the value of team sports in terms of community building and trust in your classmate, your teammate, um, confidence, frustration at times. It's all a part of growing up, and it sticks with you. I mean, you lead an organization, and if you don't build a team along the lines of a good basketball team or a good soccer team or a good football team, it's not about. I played tennis too, but it's not about playing tennis. That's an individual sport, and I don't degrade it, but it's about teamwork. And I think that's been a valuable skill and learned lesson from US.
Actually, speaking about kind of Trinity, you later went on to Trinity College in Hartford after university school and then studied marketing at Wharton School. Could you kind of walk us through how you choose Trinity and then Wharton and kind of how the transitions felt between all three of them?
Sure. If you went back and looked at my senior page in the Mabian, you'd see that there was not one academic credit. Okay, it was all sport. Next door neighbor to us, the Woods, the middle son had gone to Trinity, and his wedding reception, that we had ushers staying at our house along with their house. And I remember Sunday morning after the wedding, the Trinity grads or seniors with Bloody Marys in one hand playing Frisbee in the front yard of the Woods in our yard. And I said, Trinity, okay, it's kind of interesting. Well, it turns out that a number of university school soccer players had all gone to Trinity. And so, in fact, Trinity, a couple of years before I went there, was declared the national championship without a tournament. They were the NCAA champions. So I went to Trinity, part on the party reputation, part on the sports reputation. And it was kind of, I know I could get a good education, but it was an all-male school, so it was a logical continuation of US. I think 3 or 4 of us from the same class went to Trinity. In fact, my freshman roommate was a co-basketball player and captain, Corky Yeager. So it was a logical, easy extension going to Trinity. It was a great school, loved it. Played 3 sports my first year, and then played soccer for 3 more, basketball for 2 more. Ended up graduating with honors. Somehow the academic bug got to me. I actually, halfway through my senior year at Trinity, I was applying for law school. And a next door neighbor in Shaker, on the other side of the yard, was an attorney. So he invited me to his office over the Christmas break. I spent 2 days in the office with him, and I was bored to death. So I stopped. I said, I'm gonna grab a job. So we had interviews on campus. I got a job in Philadelphia with a pharmaceutical company, and it sounded like a great job. Management training is going to be just superb. Would have been great for 4 people. They hired 14. And we were tripping over each other, and it was boring. So I realized that I was living in Philadelphia. I'd just gotten married, and Wharton was in Philadelphia. So I went to the Wharton school to see if I could apply, and they said, yeah, you can start in January. So I quit my job after 3 months and went back to school at Wharton, simply because I didn't think I was going to get any great education out of Smith, Klein and French. Nothing against the company, but I knew it was going to be kind of, what do we do with all these people? So I went to Wharton. But Trinity was for sports, and Wharton was, to get a business education. And the natural fit for me was marketing, although it's a strong finance school. People say, you went to Wharton and studied marketing, not finance? Yep. And that's the entire logic.
Well, you describe your career path as unplanned. That phrase resonates. It's could you unpack really what you mean by that and how that mindset affected you early on? Because I can imagine how that can create some stress, but also excitement at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, Jack, for example, and again, I've got a number of kids that have gone through college, and I think as they get to college and I get older, they seem more focused on having to pick a very specific path to go to college or college and then on. And I don't disagree with that, but you got to be willing to, change your mind when the time or the circumstances require it. So, my going to Wharton was, frustration over what I was doing and where I could likely go in that corporate world. When I was at Wharton, it was one of these, oddities. There was a Friday night gathering with McKinsey and Company, consulting firm, and they were recruiting. So I went to it, and I met some people, and they said, you ought to come up, sign up for an interview the next time we're down here on campus. Okay. So I get signed up, and I was the last one on a Friday afternoon talking to a guy who said, gee, I really only have about 10 minutes, before I have to go catch my train back to New York. I said, well, that's kind of a shame and a waste of my time. He said, well, let's talk, and then we'll have you come up to New York. So the opportunity went up to New York, sitting there for a day and a half of interviews, and they send you off to a psychologist for screening. And I'm sitting with the psychologist, and this is one of these things that comes up, and he said, do you believe in reincarnation? I said, no. He said, well, if you did, and if you could come back as any animal, what would it be? I said, well, I don't believe in reincarnation, but if I did, I'd come back as an otter. And he looked at me and said, what? I said, an otter. He said, why? I said, have you ever watched an otter on a film? They're monogamous. They thrive in the winter. They lie on their backs and, open, sea shells. I mean, what better life? But that's a stupid question. So I go back to the McKinsey office. I'm sitting there with the head of HR, and his phone rings, and he turns around. He's on the phone. He said, what'd you make of that? He turned around and said, no one has ever said otter. I said, well, it's a dumb question. And if the answer matters, I don't want the job. I got the job. So, and with McKinsey, I spent 11 years there, 4 coming back to Cleveland, traveled all over the world, worked in Japan, Europe, Canada, Argentina. And it was all opportunities to learn and impact business and exposure to different ways and opportunities to think. And then in Cleveland, we had this offsite for the office, and the office manager went through the entire office strategy, which was the industrial heartland, Cleveland, government, business, etc. And the largest single client in the Cleveland office at the time was the Kellogg Company. And that was the client that I served. So the consumer practice in Cleveland was ignored. Well, I said, what the hell am I doing here? Well, they said, you could go to Chicago or New York. I said, yeah, I could go run a food company. So I ended up going to run a restaurant company back in California. But that's that was totally unplanned, but the opportunity arose, and it said, let's just go do it. See what happens. Now, I managed to get fired 2 years later, but just opened another door. I don't.
Oh,
go ahead.
Sorry, reflecting on kind of all these transitions from kind of consulting to all these different types of jobs that you had, what kind of personal qualities did you look at yourself and go, yes, this is the job, this is what kind of keeps me going, this is kind of what I'm going to do next? I mean, obviously, you kind of worked in such a large multitude of so many different jobs and roles. What kind of feeds you to kind of keep on going with all those different transitions and keep on keeping on?
Well, Terry, the one common thing was consumer product. I mean, I think in 11 years at McKinsey, I remember doing one project for an industrial company. Other than that, for some reason, I was either in, food or hard goods or some retail, but all consumer businesses. So everything I did, in terms of looking at opportunities or when opportunities came my way, if it didn't fit the consumer background or the consumer industry, I wasn't going to be interested. I mean, I wasn't going to go work for a defense contractor or a bank or, it just wasn't either who I was or what I thought I knew. And very often it was, because of relationships I built along the way. When I had left the restaurant company, Victoria Station, I actually spent about 11 months in executive recruiting with Russell Reynolds. And that was the only job I should never have taken, and on the one hand, because my sense was you called 100 people looking for somebody to be interested in a job. You found 5 or 6 that were qualified. You presented them to a company. They hired one, but 99 other people began to have misgivings about where they were or what their career was going to be. I thought you created more disruption than success. So I went back and joined another consulting firm. Well, first client that came to us was the Kellogg Company. Why? Because I'd spent 7 years there with McKinsey. So the network of, people met, businesses looked at, geography covered, just fit back into consulting again. And then 3 or 4 years later, we started our own, Swander Pace Company. 2 of us who had worked at this other consulting firm, but their focus was financial services, banks, savings and loans, corporate finance. So the 2 of us went off, and first client, Kellogg Company. Second client, Schreiber Foods in Green Bay, Wisconsin, cheese manufacturer. And it built from there. We went from 4 people to 50 in about 4 years. And it was natural. So the consumer foundation is at the heart of all of it, but a lot of it was truly unplanned. It came up by surprise or opportunity. Does that help?
Yep.
And can you take us through that transition from Swander Pace Company into Swander Pace Capital and how that happened?
Yep. When we had our office in San Francisco, one of our senior associates left Swander Pace Company and joined a local private equity firm. He was there about 2 years, and he came back to us with another fellow and said, "We want to start a private equity fund, and we'd like to call it Swander Pace Capital." We said, "You are out of your cotton picking minds." I said, "We're not going to go in and compete with our clients. I mean, we work with Kellogg, Heinz, Del Monte, major food retailer. No." So they went away, and they came back a couple times and said, "No, you really ought to think about this, because the Swander Pace name in private equity with a focus on consumer products would be compelling." We said, "All right, tell you what, we're going to go talk to all of our major clients. And if one of them says, if you do that, you will not work here again, conversation is over. We're not going to, it's just not going to do this." So we went, and every client but one said, "Well, why wouldn't you do that? In fact, maybe we ought to put some money in the fund." So we did. We started Swander Pace Capital 27 years ago. The partners in the consulting firm had a very small interest in the private equity fund, but we did all the early or operational due diligence on the businesses at full fare. There was no, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It had to be, because we couldn't ask our employees to do anything at a discount. Wasn't fair to them, wasn't fair to us economically. And I think we were active in the first 3 funds, and then it got big enough, and we ended up selling Swander Pace Company to another consulting firm in 2004. I'd left. I'd gone back to Minneapolis to run a company. That was a former client. But it seemed a logical extension. And as I said, today we own 13 companies, all, in the consumer space, food, vitamins, related businesses. So that consumer underlying is throughout.
You've spoken about a lot of different leadership in so many different kind of contexts. How would you kind of define leadership in, your kind of modern day perspective? Obviously, you've had a lot of experience with leadership at so many different levels. So, how do you kind of look at it today?
Um, Probably oddly, Charlie. I draw the organization chart upside down because the people out in the field are doing the work. The sales force, the plant manufacturing, the distribution, the the leader, likes to think they're at the top. I think you're at the bottom, first and foremost, because everybody else is enabling you to be successful. That's first. Second, it's all about a team. I've seen so many businesses where the leader tried to control everything, hub and spoke, everything had to come into them and go back out to another function or something. Um, and I think that's the wrong way to run a business. Now you have to make tough decisions, but you want people who are bringing you their perspective, their facts, and then when you decide, you can address why it wasn't exactly what you thought or they thought you were going to do. Let me give you an example. I was asked to take over a company that Swander Pace Capital was on the verge of literally giving the keys back to the bank. And they said, Dan, go down to Phoenix and take a look at this market fair. It was a food manufacturing company. So I went down for a couple of days and talked to all the top guys and went out to a plant in Salt Lake City and then one back in Virginia. Came back and I said, guys, the problem is this business is way too complex. You got a few lines of business that are making money and all the others cost. There's way too much. Everybody has to come into the CEO and then he tells somebody else what to do. So there's no teamwork. And I think, you need to put together a very quick, shrink to succeed. And the CEO said, that's very interesting. How about if we get some of that information and get back to you in a couple of months? I said, I was thinking about a couple of days. So I went back to Swander Pace Capital. I said, here's what needs to happen. So they said, okay, go down there and do it. So I commuted to Phoenix. And the first thing I did was take off all the office doors. They said, what are you doing? I said, why are you hiding? As a team, you don't need a door. I'll give you one door in a conference room if you have to go in there and have a serious conversation with somebody in the company or some customer or supplier or whatever. But you're not going to spend your days behind a closed door. The other thing I did was get rid of the 2 parking spaces for the CEO and the CFO. I said, you want that parking place, just be first in the office. And cut this hierarchy stuff out. Within 3 months, we turned it around. We ended up having to close the plant in Phoenix and move that facility to Salt Lake City, and ultimately just had the headquarters there. But turned it around, and I think in 11 months, we ended up selling the business, not closing it. But I didn't do it. I mean, my job was not to make the decisions, but embolden that team to work together. And they knew what to do right away. They saw the problems. They just didn't know how to turn them into opportunities because the structure and the style was wrong. So you change it.
And nothing you talked about there had anything to do with the data, the financials, and in a world that's so driven by those things today. When you're facing these challenging business decisions, how do you balance instincts and just human skills versus data in those moments?
My experience has been most of the data, most of the information that you need to really understand the business and figure out what is or isn't making money is available. It's there, but it may not be being looked at correctly. Let me give you a classic example in the grocery industry. People talk about percentage margins, right? 36% gross margin. I said, what do you get paid in? So we get paid in dollars. Well, let's talk about dollar margin. Let's look at each product or each customer and look about the dollars of contribution that we get from them. The percentage is a simple way to consolidate everything. The fact is that sometimes the highest cost product is also the highest dollar margin item. So don't confuse yourself on the P&L. I get it. Yeah, you're right. That's the percentage. But you don't take percentages to the bank. It's all dollars. Then the minute you start looking at that same data the right way, and it's there, you all of a sudden see, oh, I got 5 products that make 89% of our total dollars. I got 27 that make up 11%. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to stop making the stuff that we lose money on. I'll consider the stuff that we make a little money on after we've made as much as we can of the stuff we make all the money on. And I mean, it's not brilliant. It's just logical. But you get an organization thinking that way, and it changes very quickly.
From your vantage point, how has the mindset of entrepreneurs changed from when you began your career to what you're kind of seeing now in our era, or kind of this next generation of entrepreneurs?
I have my biggest concern in general is short-term focus, quarterly earnings, how quickly you get up to where you think you can take the company public or you can find a buyer. I mean, 27 years. I like buying businesses. I like fixing them. I always feel bad when you have to sell them. I mean, sometimes I don't dispute that that's the private equity game. But this quarter over quarter mindset, I think, leads people to lose perspective on the business. It's kind of, too short term, not enough long term. It's hard to fix. I mean, I think in many instances, that's probably where a board can at least try and ensure that management, stops looking down at the table and at least looks out over a year or a couple of years to see what's really going to have to change in the nature of the business. And I think that's, at least as we tried to focus our private equity skills, the analysis, the focus, and the plans, it's, we know you got to make money for the quarter, you got to achieve certain guidelines or hurdles, but don't lose, a perspective on where this business can and needs to go and how to get there. And I think, and again, everything gets moving so fast, it's hard to not get caught up in that. And at least that's my perspective. Now, it's easier in consumer products, I think, than maybe other kinds of longer term manufacturing. I mean, you start manufacturing missiles, I haven't got a clue. But that's all right. They're not consumer products, so I don't care. That help?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And you've seen multiple business cycles, the boom and the bust. How have you managed, that psychological side of business and downturns that may help, you take that long-term approach versus just focusing on the short term?
Well, again, the consumer industry as a whole is a little less volatile on the downside or the explosive side. Let me give you an example. We own a business called Purely Elizabeth, which is in the granola and oatmeal business. Now, that business is growing like crazy, but it's growing at the expense of Quaker Oats and other brands who kind of sat back and done nothing. So in the consumer environment, you could look at a stalled category and there's somebody winning. I just got off the board of Idaho Foods, which is the instant mashed potato company. When we started 17 years ago, or I started with them, they had a 10% share of the market. Today, they have a 90% share of the market. They are the market, and systematically took over at the expense of General Mills and Basic American, the retail branded business. Why? Because they were focused on it, and General Mills could have cared less about what happened to dehydrated mashed potatoes in their line of business. So what I see in consumer is, you make your own growth cycles, and I don't see, seems to me the downsides hurt the established brands that aren't doing anything innovative and aren't looking for any way to capture the next generation of consumers, if you will. I've seen that so many times that, do I want to see a depression? No. Do I want to see a slowdown? No. But I look at our portfolio in Swander Pace Capital, and I only see a couple of businesses that are truly sensitive to those kinds of swings. And they tend to be personal care can have that impact or be impacted by that. But other parts of the consumer product industry, I don't think so. I mean, guys familiar with Method, the hand soap at all? That was a company that I got on the board of, and then we ended up having to exit the CEO. So I ran it for I've been supposed to run it for 3 months while we found a new CEO, but it took 9. And so I was there for a year. And it was classic. We had invented a laundry soap concentrate that was 8 times Tide, not just in terms of concentrate. So we wanted to come out with a very small bottle that would be equal to the big Tide tub. And they have trouble with the packaging. So the top guy running the business said, well, let's just bring it out, in a bigger tub or bottle. And then when we get this bottle with a pump fixed, I said, you're nuts. The pump is the control. That's how you get the consumer to realize that, you need 2, 4, or 6 pumps, depending on the size of the load. That you give them a cup, they're going to do what they do with Tide. They always overfill. So no, we're going to wait for the pump. Well, they thought I was nuts till we got the pump. And then all of a sudden, Tide was in a panic because Method was, hand soap, laundry soap, dish soap, and it was never going to be on the makeup table in the master bedroom, but it was always going to be in the kitchen, in the guest bathroom, in the house. And that's true today. It's a leading brand, but it was by making the right decision at the time to go to market.
In terms of values, what does success mean to you now compared to when you thought of it when you first started out? Is there a difference in what that means to you?
I start with waking up. No, again, I don't have hands-on responsibility. My measure of success today is helping the businesses I'm involved in. Got 6 kids and 9 grandchildren, and they all seem to be doing okay. I'm probably content in a personal sense, just enjoying being of counsel or of advice, or sometimes a reasonable parent, sometimes maybe not, but I'm not looking for any more success. I'm looking for enjoyment.
What do you kind of think in our current world, this role of technology, whether it's data analytics, the kind of rise of AI, supply chain digitization will play in this next wave kind of consumer business growth and just overall business growth?
Well, I think I think it will probably do both, positive and have negative impacts. I mean, it'll replace repetitive jobs, no question, between robotics and AI in manufacturing or distribution. I don't think it will, well, you can do it now. You can go to the grocery store and not deal with a clerk, to check out if you want. But then, you can't buy the produce, and you can't buy there's certain things you can't buy because you can't scan it. Or they'll package it so you think you can, but then the consumer loses the choice. So I don't think it'll be total. Again, I mean, I think there'll be a transition where people will figure out AI, related jobs. And I think some skilled jobs are already in high demand, short supply. I mean, I don't know about Cleveland area or Ohio, but we are desperate to get some of the trade skills back in education. Shop mechanics, welding, electrician. They're going to be around. There's going to be a demand, and we don't have them. We got people we know whose kids are going off to a 15-week, and electrical training program, and they're going to end up being well paid by PG&E to maintain lines and equipment and networks and the like. So I think it will change, like the internet began change. AI will have a change, but I think it creates as much opportunity as it changes where the opportunity lies. I hope. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't plan to be around to see all of it, so I might. You never know.
Well, you've built this extremely successful career. Moving into some of the more reflective questions, you've built a successful career, but you also mentioned, you have 6 children. I believe you're involved with your church. And what role does this work-life balance play in your life, and how have you managed to try to, balance both your work, which seems very hands-on, with also, the rest of life and enjoying that?
Well, Jack, I'd be irresponsible if I didn't say I regret not having enough time with kids and family and wife and life while I was building, businesses that were personal service. I mean, you put your name on the door of a consulting business, you spend a lot of time with your clients. But with the kids, up until about a year and a half ago, half the kids were within, easy driving distance. Now they've moved to Boston and upstate New York and Seattle and Southern California. So all of a sudden we're sitting here in a big house with 2 of us and 2 cats. So we need to travel to spend time with the kids. And I don't do that much business travel anymore. I can deal with most of it via Zoom or off to a board meeting. We've been very active in the local Episcopal church. And right now, I'm the board president and my wife's the treasurer of a major nonprofit in the county called Winter Nights Family Shelter that basically deals with homeless families with children, temporary housing, and a year-round overnight safe parking program, helping homeless and unhoused and individuals, couples, and families living in cars. It's a big problem in California. I don't know how the numbers are in Ohio or in the Cleveland area, but the number of homeless and under sheltered folks in the Bay Area is staggering. So that's a passion. It can be all consuming if you let it. I can spend as much time on a $750,000 charity, nonprofit, that I can spend on $1 billion company. And it's no less challenging and no less rewarding. And I would not have, if you'd have asked me back in high school, college, early business, would I ever get this involved in something like a nonprofit? Or we'd been Episcopal churchgoers, and Trinity is an Episcopal school. But church wasn't a big part of my life back then. Now a major part. But again, there's the faith side, and then there's the community side, and they're inseparable in that instance. But it's all about, keeping involved. That helps.
Yeah, definitely. And then another reflection question, more about legacy that you're going to leave with your children, the next generation, your grandchildren, and also the companies that you've touched. When you think about the legacy that you're going to leave behind, what do you think and hope that people will remember?
Wow. Well, again, I think, a willingness to work hard for whatever you're trying to do, number one. Probably, a little better life balance than I exhibited for a long time. And find a way to give back. And I don't necessarily mean money. I really mean find a time or ways to engage in the community in some fashion, whether it's, through a church or through a community group, whether it's for a nonprofit or even just, a well-focused charity or activity. Enjoy it. I just, I wake up, thinking, oh, there's got to be something more to do today. And don't discount family, but they're spread out. Each of our sons has moved back to the area where their wives grew up. And in many instances, all the families are still in the same city. Well, I don't know if we tripped over each other with 6 kids in Cleveland, but, I wish we'd been closer, but I don't. I mean, there's nothing I don't regret it, because I was out here in California where my wife's family is from. So, but then, get engaged. Don't hide.
Finally, the question we ask every single one of our guests, it's been kind of a large standing tradition. What is your why? Why do you do what you do every day when it comes to making so many companies so much better in every step of their journey? And how do you kind of shape that approach every day? So, Dan, what is your why?
I'm going to go back and tell you, I think in a sense, it goes back to the way U.S. kept us engaged and involved in something all day, every day. I cannot remember being bored or not challenged at U.S. by a teacher, a sport, a non-sport activity. Whether you were in the glee club or the players or whatever. You are encouraged and rewarded by being active. I look at our class alumni get together with a Zoom call 3 times a year, and I look at the group of 15, sometimes 20, sometimes 12 to get on that call, and none of them were the guys I played sports with. All of them are, they weren't there 13 years. They're doctors, they're scientists, they run big corporations, and they are all genuinely interested in each other and in, what they can learn from each other. I learn from them every 4 months when I get on a call with them. So I think that curiosity or interest in being engaged goes all the way back to U.S. Because I think that's, now I don't think that's changed. It's probably gotten even more complex in terms of the interest and the skills that can be developed. But, you went to school every day because it's going to be interesting. I was going to say fun, but that's probably not, that's a bit extreme. but it's going to be interesting. You're going to learn something. You're going to make some mistakes. The other thing is, you're going to make mistakes. Make them. I mean, my biggest fear is that they now talk about the average grade at Harvard as an A. That's nuts. I mean, I'm not saying A's aren't good, but everybody's an A student. I doubt it. I mean, I wasn't. So, but then I didn't go to Harvard, so that's not fair.
Well, Dan, it's been great having you on the show today. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights, experiences, and stories with us. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in, and we hope you join us next Wednesday for the next episode of the Late Start Show. Thank you, Dan.